As a rational affirmation of faith, a decision by somebody who had come of age, a sacrament was developed out of that called confirmation that we know of. And that also provided a place for the bishops to get involved because as the church grew, there were too many baptisms for bishops to get around to do their part. So they would come at a particular time for confirmations. Confirmation then became a qualifier for Holy Communion, although that, because baptism was seen as the full entrance and confirmation was a reaffirmation of vows, other times, earlier times, were open for communion. There was a first communion sometimes, which is, I think, still practiced in the Roman Catholic Church at around age 6 or 7. Confirmation was at puberty, 12 or 13. And even infants were welcome to take communion. Sometimes I've dipped my finger in the wine and touched it to a baby's lips. That's fully within the theology, sacramental theology of baptism. The only problem with this solution is that people began to miss their deathbed rituals. And so the church developed what came to be called the last rites as a sacrament for that time. Now, we don't call them last rites anymore. We call it the sacrament of the sick because you never know what might kill you. And also, I think clergy got really tired of kind of being seen as the angel of death. I mean, you'd show up in a hospital room and somebody would say, I didn't know I was that bad. or you'd hear lines in movies like, he doesn't need a doctor, he needs a priest. It got kind of depressing, so we changed that. Healing rather than last rites. So 4 of the 7 sacramental rituals of the church evolved out of baptism, and 3 of those marked one-time commemorations of transition points in life: birth, coming of age, and death. Penance and absolution you kind of need all the time. Baptism remained the initiatory rite, the initiation for most of the church's history, until at least recently. Now, my experience now is that if people aren't baptized when they're babies, they are more prone to getting pretty involved in the church before they're willing to make a kind of commitment that is involved in ritual baptism as a grown-up. To adapt to that, without officially saying so, at the higher institutional levels, the church has become open to non-baptized people receiving communion as a sign of exclusion and instead of a sign, as a sign of inclusion instead of a sign of exclusion. That came up in the discussion with the presiding bishop and with our bishop in response to a question. And basically they gave that same message. Well, we're not going to say anything official here because a lot of people would get angry, but, do what you seem to think is right. And really that's something that I have been doing my whole ministry. If someone comes to the rail and holds out their hand and at least symbolically is saying, I want Jesus too, I'm not going to say no. Anyone is welcome. It doesn't depend on what you believe. God's grace is a free gift, and that's what communion symbolizes. So even though it leaves the church at large and the local congregation in some confusion about what official membership involves, it's had the consequence of freeing the rite of baptism to become, I think, a sacramental act that goes deeper than just joining a church, deeper than just naming a baby, deeper than washing away sin and presumed ritual impurity, deeper than what the presiding bishop yesterday referred to as joining the movement, the Jesus movement. Because behind and underlying all these things is the symbolism of rebirth, of death and rebirth. The death is necessary before the rebirth can happen. That's what forgiveness is all about. That's why it involves contrition. That's what initiation is all about. That's why it's an admission of incompleteness. That's what really was behind that early pull of baptism being something you did at the point of death, because of that transition to rebirth. And it's certainly what I think would be necessary for a real Jesus movement to make a difference. Christian faith, of course, does carry on the Jewish tradition of striving for a good, even a holy life in this world. A moral life, a family life, a social life, a political life that's based on law and order and compassion, based on self-respect as well as humility, on justice and responsibility as well as mercy and pity, and on many other qualities that make life safe and sane and are taught as a way of following the will of God day by day. And are also taught as ways to be good citizens, or good husbands or wives, good parents, good friends. But Christian revelation points beyond all these things, I think. Points beyond this world, without diminishing the importance of this world. Points beyond this life with its human-scaled requirements to a larger environment of the fullness of life, of a greater context of spiritual being that we very often don't experience in life when we're distracted by all the other things. It offers a transcending of the structures and strictures of human invention, and thereby gives everything ultimate meaning. Everything we do, everything we are. That's the realm, I believe, of the resurrection. That's the realm, I believe, of eternal life. That's what we mean when we talk about the kingdom of heaven. Heaven isn't up. Heaven isn't after. Heaven is the wholeness of life, of which our day-to-day experience is maybe only a part, or maybe only one perspective. Our individual lives are the contribution that we make to that fullness of reality, fullness of eternity. They're our gift to God, which, as considering the size of the universe and span of the universe, as small and bounded as they are absolutely essential for the wholeness of creation. And our lives as well are are only God's gift to us. All things come of thee, O Lord. Of thine own have we given thee. So giving and receiving and giving are what life's really all about. We're a movement within the churning of the eternal power of love. And baptism symbolizes that churning of waters. The waters of baptism symbolize what's in Hebrew called tehom, what in Greek might be called the aperon, the deep, it's called in the first chapter of Genesis. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep until the Spirit began to move and God began to speak. The waters of baptism symbolize the waters of the flood, out of which Noah emerged to carry on human life with a kind of shadowy deja vu experience that all this had been done before, but had been lost or misunderstood or misguided somehow, and we have to start again. It's that sense of starting again. The waters of baptism symbolize our birth, the memory of our individual birth, as inaccessible as that might be, and the collective memory of the birth of our species out of those aqueous environments of the womb and sea. And mostly, the waters of baptism symbolize death. But not death in the fearful way that our limited worldly consciences see it, but death to the old life, the limited life that's centered on self, short-sighted and ego-driven, that can make room for the rebirth to the larger life that's centered on God, where our full capacity to love and create can be consciously realized. That trajectory of that, as the epiphany, as the revelation, as the manifestation, is what began that day at the Jordan, with the more than factual experience of Jesus. In fact, the event that we just heard about, this at beginning of Jesus' ministry, is a premonition, a pre-echo of the culmination of that ministry at the end. At the beginning, there's the immersion and the rising out of the waters and the blessing of God and the coming of the Spirit in the form of a dove. And at the end, there's the cross, turning it over to God, and entombment, and the rising, and then the coming of the Spirit at Pentecost. So you're getting a foretaste of what we're going to be talking about until April 16th on Easter. Like any sacrament or sacramental act, the ritual of baptism doesn't do anything. It doesn't accomplish anything. Rather, it points to an already existing reality that God has accomplished. It's an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace. We're just catching up when we go through the ritual. You have died, the letter to the Colossians says, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. And it's time, I think, and I believe the presiding bishop would agree with me, It's time to turn on the light and come out of hiding. Thanks be to God.